Level 5-7. This is episode 4. Welcome notes. Welcome back to Pathways to Participation. From episode 1, we unpacked the fears that quietly shape how we perceive capability. Through episode 2, we're showing that hiring is a team sport, a system shaped by every person involved. Just recently, in episode 3, we explored the power of screening and how screening out can eliminate talent before anyone has had that chance to be seen. Today, we turn to the movement where most people believe the real evaluation begins, the interview. But as we'll explore, interviews are full of judgments that often have nothing to do with their job performance. Welcome, Sharna. Good to see you.
That's right. Interviews rarely have anything to do with the job performance. But oh my gosh, don't interviews feel familiar and like a compulsory part of the hiring process that we've got to include? But they are absolutely one of the most fraught and assumption-heavy parts of the hiring process, and that's what we're going to be talking today. And unless we learn to look past those superficial and surface-level impressions, we risk missing the capability that's right in front of us. So let me start us off with the problems with interviews. So interviews are socially loaded environments. They draw on a very narrow set of norms about what good performance looks like, and norms that have been shaped more by culture, by habit, our comfort level, and our perceptions and our preferences, rather than anything really about what predicts success for that particular person in the role. And when most people step into an interview, they bring with them an internal template. I must show that I'm confident, because if I show that I'm confident, then that'll mean that they think that I'm really competent and can be good at this. We must prepare and we must look really polished, because if we're polished, that means we're prepared and that shows them how good we can be in the job. We must be fluent in our discourse and our language and our conversation, because people will think if I can talk lots and talk fluently, then they might equate that with my intelligence and think I'm really intelligent. If I sit still in my interviews, that means that I'm focused and I'm paying attention and really on task in the interview. If I'm upbeat, that also means that I'm really capable, because I'm friendly and personable and good to work with. But these are all really deeply learned associations, and they're not actually indicators of on-the-job performance.
And I thought I was doing well. I was ticking all those boxes.
Absolutely. And as I go to say I'm sitting still, as I now just move in my chair, but no one can see us because we're on a podcast. What the science does tell us about these indicators is really quite clear. And for those of us in this area, have been across the social psychology, the disability studies, and for me, the decision-making. And all of our recent research consistently shows us that interviews, we tend to really measure people based on how they performed in the interview, not their capability of what is actually required in the job. So what we are really assessing is whether someone can navigate an artificial, a high-pressure social ritual that privileges certain neurotypes, bodies, communication styles, preferences, and cultural patterns. And this is why we so often see, so unconsciously, where we do equate those things that I just mentioned before, where we consciously or unconsciously equate confidence with competence, polish with potential, sameness with the idea that we will fit within the context of the team, fluency with intelligence, and extroversion and upbeat nature, maybe that's me, with capability in terms of what we're doing in the interview. But I want to reassure us, these shortcuts, we're not doing them to cause harm to other people. They're just things that are automatically and kind of sit really natural with us, or have for a long set of time been beneath our awareness of what interviews are actually for. And we teach lots of people, like if you look on how to prepare for an interview, it will give you more things about how to talk, construct your sentences, what to wear, how to do a handshake. We'll come to all of these. And if we look at them and really think about them, we know that they have nothing to really do with how someone will do the job and perform on the job. But these shortcuts and these ways in which we make the associations can have real life consequences. And they have real life consequences disproportionately negatively for people with disability, including those that are neurodivergent. Because those communication styles, their sensory needs, their social behaviors might not align with kind of the rules of what makes somebody perform well in an interview. And unless we all together, all of the team members in the team for inclusive hiring, because remember, inclusive hiring is a team sport, we end up selecting for interview performance, not on-the-job performance.
So we're going to go through the examples, just in your outline there, mentioning about a handshake and about I suppose, a deportment. All of these things that I have in a conditional way felt as a part of that interview because you were introducing yourself and that you needed to be appearing at your strength.
That's absolutely the point, Chris. And we'll talk about handshakes, but
eye contact then even.
Yeah, let's start with eye contact, because I think eye contact is a really powerful example and one that is really close to my heart as Sharna Lee and also Dr. Sharna, is the idea of eye contact and sort of this importance that we place on eye contact and the assumptions we have behind it. So many people assume that eye contact equals respect, honesty, confidence, or engagement. And there's this really interesting, I was going to say weird, I changed my language, but interesting way in which we tell people to look at me when I'm talking to you. So this idea that eye contact is really a way of showing respect or that I'm listening to you. And there's this really deeply embedded social rule around eye contact as that aspect of respect. But here's the reality. Like eye contact, it's a culturally specific and neurotypical specific behavior. And under no circumstances is the way in which I make eye contact with you or not make eye contact with you a measure of my capability or my ability to do a job or to do a task. So let's be really clear that having this socially embedded rule has no relationship whatsoever to whether somebody can actually do the job and be capable in a role. But we judge people on eye contact all the time. And if we're more specific for those people with disability and people that are neurodivergent, sustaining eye contact for them is uncomfortable. It's distracting and even distressing. If we ask people with neurodiversity to ask them to make eye contact with them, that can actually be physically difficult. The same applies for people with disability. Sometimes that is just physically difficult for them to be doing. For others, it's just simply not the best way that they communicate. So using all of their mental energy and computing power to maintain and keep eye contact doesn't actually help them express what it is that they're trying to communicate. And I want to talk about eye contact specifically because as an executive educator, it was really important that I never assumed that students looking directly at me were more engaged. I never made that assumption. In a classroom in front of 30 to a couple of hundred students, I never made the assumption that if a student was looking at me, that they were actually engaged in the learning process and listening to what I was saying. Nor did I assume that if somebody was looking away from me, that they were less engaged or they weren't listening and paying attention and being involved in the learning processes. So I would explicitly tell my students this. I would tell them up front at the beginning of lectures that everyone is free to look wherever they need to learn. That their eye contact with me was not something that I was going to be managing as part of their learning process, that they could look wherever they needed to look, up, down, left, right, twiddling their thumbs at their fingernails. I did not care because for me, that wasn't an indication that they were engaged in their learning process. So I think that really simple shift, even from my personal level and removing the assumption that eye contact equals attention, it made space for my students to be able to just learn in a way that worked for them. And then employers can do the same. So we can take away that emphasis that we put on eye contact in an interview process. And I think that helps us go into the please don't judge me, which is what we've titled this episode, is that please don't judge me based on my eye contact, because whether I make eye contact with you or not is not going to be influencing whether I can do the job and whether you should be screening me in the process.
Yeah, thank you, Sharna. Eye contact, certainly one example, but there must be many more.
Absolutely. And they show up in almost every interview. So a handshake.
So tell me about what I've got to learn properly now.
I know. Isn't a firm handshake equated with confidence? Haven't you heard that before? That if you walk in, you have a firm...
Not the gorilla grip. I don't
Not
want
the
that
gorilla
one.
grip. Well, I know as a female, people judge me on my handshake all of the time. They're like, well, that's quite firm and strong. And I'm like, okay. But we do have some ways in which we judge people at the beginning of the interview with a handshake and the idea that a firm handshake is often equated with confidence. But again, grip strength, which really part of what a handshake might be, has absolutely no relationship to competence or reliability. And for others, a handshake can be really uncomfortable. It can be unsafe or culturally inappropriate. So let's not judge people on their handshake.
Right. Learning continues. A fidgeting or a sitting still.
Yeah, so I just joked before in the episode that we're on a podcast and I did move the way in which I was sitting. But of course, if we were in an interview and knew we had a video, then I might have been judged for that. I might have been judged for changing the way in which I was sitting or making myself comfortable. But we do often assume that sitting still and a composed body reflects being focused. And it's just not the case. But movement, so we can talk about fidgeting, we can talk about swaying, we can talk about standing, is a really common form of self-regulation, and it can help people manage anxiety or sensory input. I find that, just expecting stillness as a proxy for attentiveness can really create barriers. And those barriers and that idea of stillness for attentiveness has no relationship to on-the-job performance.
At the start of, I think, all interviews, really, there's that small talk moment where we have thought making the person comfortable. Positive, negative?
Well, it's another thing that we kind of have these social expectations that we must engage in small talk. And so a lot of us are trained, or we have our kind of go-to small talk topics, which of course for Australians tends to be the weather. So you can find that many of your small talk conversations that we have in lots of different scenarios, not just interviews, tends to be the weather. Oh, it's hot today, cold today. Wasn't as bit colder than I expected. But when we're looking at that in a formal interview environment, there are some assumptions where we judge people based on their small talk and that idea that whether they can connect and they can build with people. But there really is a whole heap of perception that goes into that. And that idea that if you can speak and have small talk with somebody somehow will make them a better fit. Like we can make a whole heap of judgments about people before the interview even formally starts, and that can be around small talk. So what we want to be doing with the please don't judge me aspect is to recognize that if people are quiet, they're anxious, they're culturally diverse, if they're people with disability or neurodiverse, then the fact that they're not engaging in small talk with you doesn't mean that they're disengaged with you, doesn't mean that they don't care about the job, doesn't mean that they don't care about you. It also has nothing to do with their capability and, again, their ability to perform the job or perform the task. It might just be that they don't want to have small talk, which many of us, regardless of the context, can find incredibly awkward.
Would you extend that even through an appearance like clothing?
We absolutely do judge people based on the clothing that they wear for that interview. And again, if we're looking at how to prepare for an interview, there will be so many guidelines on how to look polished and presentable. But that creates a whole heap of barriers to how people are or how they perform or what they have access to. But it's really also about that decision maker in interviews' perception of what that person should be wearing. And again, for the most part, that has zero to do with how they're going to go on the job. Yeah, and here's the part where we know we're doing it. So the impact of these surface level judgments is both predictable and really profound. If we want to have hiring decisions that genuinely open the doors to participations, then we have to confront the quiet ways in which we judge people. And sometimes we judge people without even realizing it on criteria. And so when we let things like eye contact, stillness, again, maybe someone's tone of voice or the words that they use, their clothing or their small talk, when we let those shape our decisions, we're not actually assessing someone's capability. And we need to understand that. We might be assessing our comfort or our expectations of what will happen in an interview setting, but this tells us absolutely nothing about the person. And so the whole point of this episode is really simple. That we can reshape hiring decisions so we stop judging people on things that have nothing to do with the work team. So please look beyond the surface level impressions and we open our eyes with curiosity and think about why not yet and how can this person demonstrate their skills and how can we help them show their ability to contribute and their capabilities. Then we don't just create more inclusive hiring processes, we can create better ones for all candidates and specifically people with disability. Yes, because once we understand how easily interviews can distort our perception of talent and candidates and the right candidate, then the next question that we lead to is, so how do we design interviews that actually work? And that's what episode 5 is all about.